Good afternoon there. How are you today? It's Wednesday, May 25, 2022. It's Christian here. I'm come on the Facebook Live right now because I wanted to go through a whole bunch of stories which I really haven't had time to get into writing up for my website, Coolopolis. Now, I'm going to share you the screen that I'm working with right here. It's got about 30 different tabs, so we're going to go through them relatively quickly, discuss a bunch of issues, including what's said in the title, Zoot Suits, and trying to figure what the heck that whole thing was about, Zoot Suits. Now, the first story I caught my attention is a fire in 1952 in NDG. Now, there was a huge fire. There's a famous fire elsewhere in NDG that I've written about a couple of times, and it was quite a interesting story, but I realized then that there was other stuff that I haven't mentioned. That this one killed 5 people. This is a place on. Let me show you where it is. Do you know Hampton Avenue, just below Sherbrooke. Now, 2329 would be this building here. So 5 people died in a fire here in January 1952. Now, the Montreal Star, they kind of focused on the story in a sort of a happy way. This woman, Mrs. Eldon Clark, holds her 3 babies: Douglas, 4 months; Audrey and Eldon Jr., 3 years old, after they were saved from the burning fire. Now, I guess it was some sort of old age home. This is a woman named Annie Westerhold who carried out an 86-year-old man, Mr. T.M. Wyatt, out of the fire and saved his life. Here's a pretty good dramatic photo of that fire. I wish I could see the original because the newspaper version, of course, is very low resolution. And of course, this was a shocking fire. And the fact that it killed elderly people rather than young people, I suppose that made it slightly less tragic. I guess that's a philosophical question. You know, it would be very sad if young people died. Of course, it's sad when old people die too, but you know, they're the number of years ahead of them or less. Now, it's apparently started in the basement of 2329 Hampton, and the caretaker was out at the time. Now, I don't know what time of day or night it was. It probably says in the article, but why wasn't the caretaker there? Well, shouldn't he be home? Come on, get home, guy. And so the rest of the account talks about the fire and the sad result: 5 people dying in a fire in NDG. An especially tragic and distressing toll of death was taken by the weekend fire at the apartment building on 2329 Hampton Avenue in NDG. All of the 5 who lost their lives were elderly, ranging in age from 68 to 85 years. Now, hold on a second. Let me get back to this. So next time you pass by this home, you'll hear the ghosts. You will hear the ghosts of the dead from this building. Otherwise tranquil NDG, Notre Dame de Grâce. So I was going to mention that. That's the east side of the street. So I was going to mention that NDG is actually the name for the neighborhood, but people really didn't like that name. They wanted to call it a bunch of other stuff like the New Plateau, Montrose. Those were some of the other names. I guess I shouldn't spoil that story. I'll tell it another time. But the fact is, Notre Dame de Grâce is obviously how it's known today, NDG. But people didn't really want to call it that. So okay, enough about the fire. Let's move on to what else I got going here. Yet again, another ponderous think piece from the Montreal Star about the fire. I don't know what they're saying here, but it's the Saint Cunegonde fire was around the same time. I've got that in another entry on Coolopolis. There was a huge fire outside of what's now the Lionel Grew Metro. It took the lives of a lot of people around that same time. And I see that they were 5 victims, included a woman bedridden with a broken hip and 2 who were nearly blind. Uh, the the maid, a nurse and a maid, escaped by a rear fire escape. I wonder if the nurse who carried people out had to choose between who to save. Isn't that the old perennial thing? Who would you save? You better be nice to people, because If they're going to have to choose who to save, you want to be one of them. The dead were identified as Mrs. Horace Cole. Funny how they didn't use their names, did they? Mrs. Janet Griffiths, I guess that's her first name, whereas Horace is, of course, the man's name. Miss Georgina Webster, 85, and Louise Davidson, 84, and Frank Hazeldon, 84. So most of them were women. Okay, enough about that fire. Let's go. Now, this is a story I wrote up a few years ago about a perky young woman who did a pretty funny thing. It's a bit of a publicity stunt, and I'm not really sure who put her up to this publicity stunt and why, but it was kind of a funny thing. Her name is Teresa Duncan. Apparently, she lives in Westmount, or lives in Westmount. This is 1947, July 1947, and what I'm sorry, I'm laughing because it's kind of a funny stunt. She wrote to a member of Parliament, the CCF member of from Mackenzie, Saskatchewan, to ask him simply, could you give me a list of wealthy men in Canada, because she wanted to marry one of them. To think that there are 67 single male Canadians in this category is really something for us girls to ponder over, the slim 5'6" brunette told the parliamentarian. Are there any of them living in Montreal? However, in an answer to the 24-year-old Westmount girl's letter, the MP said he was very sorry he could not give her the names of the eligible bachelors who would be able to give you the financial security for the rest of your life. Now, Teresa Duncan later wrote a letter to the editor saying, look, this was just a funny thing. It wasn't meant as a real thing. But of course, I really wanted to know what happened to Teresa Duncan and whether she actually ended up marrying a wealthy guy, because that would be kind of cool if she did. She's got a pretty face and she seemed quite perky. And I guess that's the way things worked back then. Her address was 1384 Green Avenue, and she says, come over anytime you're ready. I will accept candidates whose annual does not exceed the 100 grand bracket, but crowds it. So in other words, she'd be willing to take someone who's slightly less than $100,000 a year. I'm willing to exchange a typewriter for a super deluxe apartment with a built-in kitchen, but what girl wouldn't, she asked. Now, the writer of the story, Russell Gillies, I guess he was in on the prank, I suppose, somehow, because how else would he have located her? Or anyway, it's sort of a bit hard to figure out what she was up to, this Teresa Duncan. So I got a kick out of that story, a happy story from 1947, of course, 2 years after the war ended, and of course the war changed everything. The war was massive on anything. Once again, World War II. This caught my eye. It was a 1944 story, obviously, during the war. The first member of Montreal's Chinese community to lose his wife on active service in the war, Private Ivan Guy Lee, 22, died of wounds in Belgium on September 27. His mother, Mrs. Fong Lane Lee of 1242 St. Urban Street, has been informed. 1242 St. Urban is on St. Urban, just below Dorchester. Is, of course, the I guess complex Guy Favreau or something, part of Chinatown at the time, or University Settlement nearby. He was a member of the Chinese Atlas Club, a sports organization, and was an enthusiastic member of its hockey team. So, of course, it's sad. He was working as a machinist, so of course it's sad when people die in war. I'm kind of surprised that the first Chinese Montrealer was killed in 1944. You would have imagined with the number of people dying during that war, it would have been more. So, salute to Ivan Guy Lee. Gave his life for freedom. Now, this is not relevant to what I'm researching. I'm trying to learn how to do better Photoshop, free Photoshop. Here's an interesting photo of, I put this on my Twitter, a man running a shop. He was running a car parts shop, was attacked in broad daylight by a guy who robbed him, smashed him over the head with a tire iron, a crowbar. And this usually doesn't happen, but somehow the newspapers, a couple of them, got a photo of him after his being attacked, which is quite unusual at the time. That happened in 1952. What's his name? Maurice Boucher. Of course, it's the same name as the biker leader, right? I don't imagine he's related to Maurice Mom Boucher, but he was living at 4553 Garnier Street, which I guess would be on the plateau. I knew an old man on Garnier Street, so now that we mentioned it, it seems to spark that memory. Now, I don't know why I have this page open. It just seems to be open. But, oh yeah, another story about that same attack. What caught my eye over here was France wars on illegal drug traffic. As you know, I've often mused about why there wasn't more drug trafficking in Montreal and Canada by the underworld during this period, but once in a while you'll see mentions of it. Now here, this article from 1952 discusses how France is concerned about its drug traffickers pouring heroin to the US and Canada at the rate of up to 145 million a year. I don't even really know what that number means, but the movie French Connection, of course, done about 20 years later, deals with this very same thing, how they brought drugs in, specifically, I guess, heroin, to North America. And that was the route via Marseille. Okay, so that wasn't really relevant. Now, there was a story here which crazy from 1953. A guy named Roland Genet. He was, his wife was found dead, so he was considered a suspect. But there was a twist in this. I wish I had a photo of his wife because she's quite lovely. And he's actually not a bad-looking guy either. So here's this nice-looking couple, and she dies, and he's accused of killing her. Now, I believe that she was killed in a burning bed. So he hid his evidence. Now, look at this picture of him. He looks like a movie star, Roland Genet. Now, there's a tricky thing. I'll tell you the real longer story, okay? Another woman was found dead with 31 knife wounds in Ile Bizarre. So what does this have to do with Roland Genet, who's suspected in the murder of his wife? Okay, I'm going to explain this to you in a second. Now, once again, mystery, mystery, mystery. Another article saying what's going on with this case. Roland Genet of 3455 Gascon Street is suspected or charged. We'll see. Homicide squad's detectives reported yesterday no clues had been uncovered in the bludgeoning slaying of 23-year-old Madame Roland Genet on her Gascon Street apartment Tuesday night. Score of persons, including the victim's husband and relatives, have been questioned by police, but no one's being held. Okay, so there is going to be a payoff to this story, which seems to be a mystery so far. You're going to enjoy it. Hold tight. Montreal police have a few clues in slaying. So this is the same story. I have a photo of her now. I only have a terrible, sad photo of Madame Roland Genet. That's not the picture you want because she was quite pretty. Here's what I wrote about it after I figured it out. Now, this is something I wrote in 6 years ago on Coolopolis. I even did a nice Photoshop imagining that. Here's the tale of the horribly manipulative Roland Genet, who persuaded his girlfriend to kill his wife at their home at 3455 Gascon Avenue on 30 May 1951, and went on to murder that same homicidal girlfriend 2 years later. In other words, you got this guy who persuaded his girlfriend to kill his wife, and then he killed the girlfriend. Sheepers. Marie-Paul Langlais met Genet while she was riding her bicycle, and the two hit it off in 1950. Genet said that he felt lonely because his wife, Rita Genet, didn't like to leave the house much. They had been married 3 years and had no children, so he proposed to his new mistress, Langlais, that she should kill his wife to allow them to spend more time together. He gave her a key and an iron bar, and she did the deed, covering up the murder with a fire. Police quickly noticed blood on the carpet and a smashed skull, and later autopsy proved that Genet had not died of fire. She did not smoke anyway. However, Roland had an alibi as he was playing pool with his brother-in-law, so he was eliminated as a suspect. Fast forward to May 1953, when Genet and his girlfriend Langlais were hanging out and apparently got into a fight. Langlais is said to have worked at the Saint-Jean-de-Dieu mental hospital, but by this time was making a meager living at a cookie factory and living in a room on Delormier. Genet, 34 and now unemployed, was living with his parents on Le Tourneau. Langlais became super aggressive, according to Genet, and he was forced to defend himself against her attack. The story did not seem credible. Langlais killed her and dumped her naked body in the snow on a farm in Ile-Bizard with 32 stab wounds and throat slashed. Oh, I suppose the photo I just showed you of the dead woman was actually Marie Langlais and not his original wife. Genet went overboard to make it more difficult to recognize Langlais. Some whispered the killing was a satanic occult thing. Genet ditched all evidence meticulously all around town. Nobody could identify Langlais, so police issued an open call to examine her body. Over 100 did so, some legitimately believing it was a lost relative, and others just out of morbid curiosity. The victim's mother and two sisters eventually showed up and told police about Genet, a former Montreal Transit Commission trolley trackman. He eventually confessed. He was hanged at Bordeaux prison. Ooh, that's sad, eh? So, let me see. This would be, I guess, the original wife. Okay, the original wife that he had the girlfriend kill. So just a terrible, 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 terrible story. Now, let's move on to what else I got. This is a kind of an interesting story. There is a school in the East End until I think the 70s called St. Aloysius, and it was an English school around around Peneth and St. Catherine. So you got this story here about what they're doing. 1951, November 1951. The kids are actually learning words before they learn the letters, and I suppose that was a revolutionary approach to learning back then. John Kilcullen, 6 of 5106 Adam Street, pronounces the words he had learned since school opened in September. By June, his reading vocabulary will include more than 300 words. At right, Mrs. Bertha Quinn, grade 1 teacher at St. Aloysius School, with students Brian Kerr and Paul Reed. Now, of course, what's interesting of all this is that there seemed to be a sufficient number of English speakers in that part of town, the east end of Montreal, around Peneth and St. Catherine. And, of course, you'd be hard-pressed to find a whole lot of young people. That school is long closed, of the English persuasion in that area. Here's a St. Aloysius School, 1950. Look at this guy. He looks like a movie star. They were priests teaching the kids. It was a Catholic English school. So you had occasional stories about the St. Aloysius School, which is now forgotten by history. Here's a kid from St. Aloysius School, 1939. Beautiful photo of him and his dog. He wrote an essay about the dog, I guess, and it won him a prize. So what happened to all these people who grew up in the east end of Montreal? Where are they now? I guess they're long gone. And here's another kid from that same area, 13 years old, Eric Jensen. He went to St. Aloysius. He won sort of thing. There's a sentimental nostalgia mention of the same school, St. Aloysius. My early memories were of Fifth Avenue, where my family, 6 kids, went to the St. Aloysius School on Adam and Peneth and learned to swim at the baths on Ontario Street near Morgan Avenue. If you go down to that part of town, someone named Grace Carroll wrote that in 1996 from Point Claire. If you go down to that part of town, it's quite an adventure sometimes. So you got this hockey team, St. Aloysius. They look vicious, don't they? Little boys playing hockey. One of them is named H. Blades. What a great name for a hockey player. So these little kids, Donnelly, Clark, Tompkinson, Wood, Smith, Blades, Mackay, Sargent, Hervase, Clancy, Mazieka, Brian Brown. So these are the kids of St. Aloysius, 1951. And this guy, he was at the Gazette for quite a long time. It turns out that this Ashok Chandwani, he went to St. Aloysius. There's another sports reporter named Pat Curran, who was quite a big deal. He went to St. Aloysius as well. Let's see. I'm going to tell you about a guy whose name is Ronald McDonald. He lives at 795 Notre Dame Street East. That's another English guy way in the East End. Boy, so a funny story about how he applied to become a police officer in 1940. This article talks about how he was refused, but indeed he was not refused. It was a misleading headline. So he applied for a job at the police force. His application was filed for consideration, but officers believed he was too tall for the job. The height measuring apparatus at headquarters couldn't extend enough to accommodate the candidate's inches, 81 of them. The 6 foot niner tips the scales at 190 pounds, so he's skinny and tall. He was head and shoulders above everybody else at headquarters, where the average height is 6 feet. I'm a bit skeptical that they actually, men exaggerate their height always. I find it hard to believe the average height for a police officer in Montreal in 1940 was 6 feet. MacDonald sleeps in a specially built bed and has to have all his clothes made for him. His favorite sport, he said, is basketball. It's so easy for him to score. I guess it's so easy for Ronald MacDonald to score. It's quite an unfortunate name, isn't it? So the next picture, I think I have a photo of Ronald MacDonald, the cop. But it says, I don't know what I've just opened here, what this page is. My apologies. Doesn't seem to be anything relevant. Oh, I guess the reason I have this, it has something to do with Ronald MacDonald. I'll get back to that in a second. There was a law passed that if you didn't pay your tax of some sort, they would have the right to seize your equipment, seize your stuff, but you're allowed to exempt anything that would be needed for your work. So basically you could say, hey, I need this for my work, so you could keep all your stuff. That caught my eye. Oh, hold on. Here's a picture of Ronald MacDonald, the Montreal police officer who was supposedly too tall for the job. But as you could see, he was legitimately tall. Now, I find it interesting because you would expect a guy like that to be, featured in a bunch of stories. This is 1946. And he wasn't. This guy really only made the news on this one occasion, as far as I could see. It says 6'9" Peel Street cop, one-man tourist goodwill force, fast becoming a legend among information-hungry American tourists. To the city is towering 6'9" Constable Ronald MacDonald of the Montreal Police Department, who is probably more of a determining factor in the Canadian-U.S. goodwill policy than any other diplomatic service ever established here. Bruce Taylor wrote this story. Bruce Taylor's son is on my Facebook friends list. He's an interesting character, Bruce Taylor. The story is obviously total fluff, the way he's writing it, not really getting to any point. A veritable walking city director, 25-year-old MacDonald, possibly the tallest man on the force. What do you mean, possibly the tallest man on the force? There's nobody going to be taller than 6'9". Has been with the department only 3 weeks and has already accounts of his polite and tactful manner. You see, you read an article saying possibly you'd say the tallest man on the force, right? And then somebody will write and say, oh no, there's somebody taller, and then the whole newspaper. So the editors is probably the guy who changed that to possibly the tallest guy. Of course, he's the tallest guy in the force. MacDonald does not excel in aiding Americans only, for he speaks both French and English with equal facility. So his tall, swinging figure isn't already familiar enough. So he attended St. Aloysius School. I suppose that's why I found him. He has spent 4.5 years with the RCAF, serving in Montreal, Borden, Victoriaville, Rockcliffe, Ontario. So he didn't serve in Europe, but he goes, life is pretty rugged, pulling airmen out of bars and night spots. Okay, so anyway, so there's the tall cop, and I wish he became more of a legend in the city because it seems like an interesting guy. But I couldn't find any more mention of him. Poor Ronald MacDonald. Okay, so another guy with the exact same name, Ronald MacDonald, was involved in another crazy story from around that same time, 1966. Well, I should say same time. It was 20 years different. So this fellow forged his teaching credentials, and he worked at the Montreal Hygiene Institute under a fake name, Everett Marshall. He left his job in 1962 before his credentials could be checked. So in other words, this character, Ronald MacDonald, just faked his identity and got a very posh job at a mental health facility in Montreal where he worked for a couple of years. 2 years, imagine that. So eventually he took off because he realized they were on his tail. So there's a couple of articles about that Ronald MacDonald kicking around, and it's worth looking into. He's a hilarious character. And I believe later on he was interviewed and he said, "Look, I'm repentant and it just happened this way." Basically, what happened is he was attending school in Michigan, I guess Detroit, and he was kicked out for a very kind of small reason. And so his ability to make a living was thoroughly compromised. That's why he was forced into using the false identity for a while. And he did it at a couple of places, but I was sort of only interested in the Montreal example because that's what this thing is about. Now, the rest of this video is going to be about the Zoot suit riots of Montreal and elsewhere. Of course, you're probably familiar with what a Zoot suit is. It's a sort of a pimp uniform that Jim Carrey wears in The Mask, and it's kind of a comical looking thing. And it was actually banned. It was made illegal in the States and Canada. So why? There are many articles done, maybe even studies about Zoot suits, and what it meant is really to this day like unclear. Like, what is the idea that the Zoot suit caused servicemen, these Army and Navy types, to get very angry and want to beat them up? So that was basically what was happening. If you were serving in Europe or somewhere, you'd come back to town, Montreal or wherever you were stationed, and you'd see these guys, and right away it was a battle, it was a fight. Nobody wanted to see these guys. So what was the reason that these guys in their funny suits enraged the servicemen, the military guys? Now, my assumption would be that basically these guys were serving overseas and risking their lives defending their country in combat, and they come back to town and they see these kind of sketchy guys, hitting on their girlfriends, wearing pimp uniforms, and it just rubbed them the wrong way. So there were a couple of incredibly vicious battles, and I believe that the servicemen were basically tearing these kids apart. It was not pretty. So the other problem with the Zoot suit, of course, is it used a lot more fabric, and if you were using fabric, it kind of undermined the war effort. That was one of the reasons that it was banned. So you got your I believe Jean Drapeau, who was a who was a lawyer before he became a longtime mayor of Montreal, kind of made a name by labeling the Zoot suit battles as a sort of an attack on French people. So it became a sort of English-French thing in his views, but wasn't necessarily only that. And if we look through the papers at the time, there seems to have a bit more complexity, right? You could see that they're characterized both positively and negatively. So, we see stuff like the Zoot suit robberies, the Zoot suit murders. It doesn't look favorable across North America, United States, and Canada. What is there in a Zoot suit that attracts so many sailors? What is wrong with a Zoot suit? Most people believe that because a person is wearing a Zoot suit, he is a draft dodger. Some are, but most draft dodgers are older than the Zoot suit youth. Among Zoot suit boys, there's 1 out of 25 who are of draft age. I have just read about the weekend fights between Zoot suiters and the armed forces, mostly Navy boys. The fight was claimed to have been started by the Zoot suiter, but if we go back to the very beginning of the Zoot suit fights, we remember that it was the Navy who first attacked the Zoot suiters. As my memory recalls, when Zoot suiters were beginning to be worn for the first time, which was in the USA, the Navy again was the first to attack these Zoot suiters. I also remember reading about a Montreal fight which consisted of 200 Zoot suiters. These boys were all arrested, and when they were released, the court was able to state that every boy from the first to the last was either under the draft age or had his discharge papers. This again proves my point that very few Zoot suiters are draft dodgers. I have a brother who wears his clothes like this. He has received a medical discharge from the Army. So this letter defending the Zoot suiters is basically concedes that, of course, the hostility is a result of the fact that these young guys wearing the funny suits are perceived as avoiding the war, kind of draft dodgers. There we go, right? But, sir, I hope you may be able to publish this letter in reply to that signed by Radcliffe Hay, who cast aspersions on that work of art, namely the Zoot suit. So here somebody wrote an article praising the Zoot suit, saying, I hope to see the day when everyone will be wearing a fine zoot suit. The wide shoulders and beautiful drape of this wonderful creation can make anybody look sharp enough. Come on, boy, comb the cobwebs out of your whiskers and join the ranks of Montreal's zoot suiters. Get your mind off war and rationing other uh, bothersome annoyances. Go where you can hear a hot trumpet wail and a tortured raptor, and the drums beating in savage rhythm. A good swing band can send you out of this world, and the proper attire has got to be a zoot suit. W. Harris signed this, so I don't know why he would write this letter. Of course, it's a done in 1943, which was a rather grim time. So a lot of young men were dying in war in Europe and fighting Nazis. It's pretty. So you could see that that kind of thing, partying while other people are at war, would cause a sort of hostility. So here's 34 accused freed in Zoot suit case, charged with disturbing the peace during a recent uprising between servicemen and Zoot suiters. 34 of 38 servicemen who appeared in court today were freed. So the guys, these military guys who were beating up these Zoot suit kids, maybe they were given very light penalties. Here's a weird one. Basically, the tailors who were actually making and selling Zoot suits were fined routinely. So this guy, Leo Morancy, tailor of 3845 Ontario Street East, fined $100 and costs popularizing Zoot suits, blah, blah, blah. So that is August 1943. Another one, cops went and searched premises for evidence of making Zoot suits. This one doesn't have any real details in it, though. So they were taking this whole Zoot suit thing seriously. And here's an article, that same Radcliffe Hay, I wonder if that's his real name, wrote a letter questioning whether the local tailors were even making the Zoot suits or whether they were actually made elsewhere. But are Zoot suits made in Montreal? Would you kindly place the undersigned article in your paper and see if we can get a solution to this problem? How about Zoot suits? If you go to a tailor and try to order a double-breasted suit and a pair of pants with cuffs, you're promptly told of the wartime prices and trade board rulings that you would wind up with a rather skimpy suit. Now we come to the Zoot suit, this monstrosity of the tailor's nightmare. What do you find? You find enough material in the thing that they call the coat to make more than the regulation double-breasted suit coat, etc., etc. So this guy Radcliffe, I don't know who he is or what he was about. He was denouncing the Zoot suits. Here's another one. Sees conscription as remedy for Zoot suiters. So here's an anti-Zoot suit tirade. After reading the comment in the Montreal Star about Zoot suiters, I have two boys somewhere in the invasion, and may God bless them, and I have a brother somewhere with the BEF and lost one on active service. My husband was with the last war from 1915 to 19 and went over in 1940. When we see and hear what is going on with the Zoot suiters or draft dodgers, I think it is a crying shame and let down to our boys over there who are giving their lives for freedom. And so this one is unsigned other than soldier's mother and wife. So I guess if they liked a letter sufficiently, they would run it even if you didn't give your name. And that one, okay, here's a funny thing. Look, Belmont Park, if you remember, it was basically the predecessor to Laron. They had all sorts of amusement park. Belmont Park offers $1,000 reward for information leading to the conviction of persons circulating malicious rumors to the effect that there has been a collision or derailment of trains at Belmont Park, or that there has been a Zoot suit riot at Belmont Park. These rumors are absolutely false and without foundation whatsoever. Why? Blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of funny because, they're just repeating the rumors, right? They're amplifying it. So, of course, no one's going to get the $1,000 because no one's going to be convicted of anything. It's what it was. It's not a crime. It would be a it would be a civil suit, not a criminal suit. Anyway, the Protestant School Board of Montreal has growing concern over Zoot suit hoodlum elements who are instigating street fights. This is 1944. So, once again, another Zoot suit producer. I mean, come on. Here's a war going on, and we're worrying about people wearing certain types of clothing. It seems absolutely strange. Okay, so here, 1942, Zoot suit killers get 50 years. This is a New York story, but the fact that there's a big story talking about the Zoot Suit killers. It's kind of strange, don't you find? That would probably be not great publicity for those suits. And I didn't really study this story. Neil Simonelli and Joseph Annunziata, the Zoot Suit killers of Brooklyn, were sentenced today to 50 years to life each. I guess they were still be in jail now almost. So I'm not that interested in that thing. Once again, another Montreal tailor, 311 St. Catherine Street East, fined $200 for making a Zoot suit. And St. Lambert averts Zoot suit battle. Approximately, this is 1944. 15 Zoot suit clad Montrealers and 100 St. Lambert youth came to within an ace of clashing Saturday night. So not all fights were servicemen, military guys with Zoot suit guys. Some of them were just normal guys with the Zoot suit kids. So sometimes when they were getting beat on, these kids would tear off their Zoot suits and hide them, but it was sort of difficult. So because even if you got rid of the coat, you could sell the pants. So I guess I should really show a photo of the Zoot suit, but I'm assuming that you know what they look like. And no photo of Montreal Zoot suiters seems to exist anywhere. There's photos of various suit people around the world, but not Montrealers. Sailor haters fight with photo. This is kind of silly. I'll quickly give you the quick version of it. A 19-year-old girl lost her wallet, and then her wallet had a picture of her boyfriend, who was a sailor. And it was the kid who found this was a Zoot suit kid, and he sent the wallet back to the girl, but he kept the money, and he destroyed the photo of the guy because he objected to her going out with a sailor, because he as a Zoot suit guy despised sailors. Whew. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I have not a whole lot more to discuss other than that, but I invite you to keep looking at Coolopolis. Hopefully I'll find time to write up a few of these stories and add them to the site. Okay, so I'm closing down. Thank you for watching.